Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to the show today. It is Wednesday, April 20th, 2016, middle of the week, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Kaahumanu Friday, and another crazy weekend as we barrel on through a very crazy year here. Obviously, the big story at the top here is the New York primary results. And before I forget it, the phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. So, yesterday's primary, it was a landslide for Donald Trump. And Hillary Clinton did beat Bernie Sanders, but not by that wide a margin. Basically, Trump picked up 89 delegates to Kasich's 3. Ted Cruz was shut out entirely. In fact, he got less votes than Ben Carson, who isn't even in the race anymore. Now, Hillary's victory, and I use that term loosely, over Sanders was marginal. Hillary picked up 139 delegates to Sanders 106. But we are seeing all over the place reports of massive problems with the Democratic vote. Broken machines, changed party affiliations, or outright scrubbing from the voter rolls, over 100,000 in Brooklyn alone. And needless to say, these irregularities and errors seem to be hitting precincts where Sanders was strong. And already there's talk of lawsuits. This election is going to turn out to be more chaotic than that 2000 debacle between Al Gore and George Bush. And it's insane. Now, Hillary, of course, needed a win to break Sanders' winning streak, but if you really think about it, Hillary has won 2 of the last 10 primaries. And already we're seeing, even in places in some of the establishment media, questions raised about just what was going on in New York. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that Bernie Sanders was attracting a very young demographic who had tried to re-register as Democrats, but New York has a deadline, like last October. And so their registrations hadn't been changed. Now, I think that's unrealistic to have that long a waiting period to change your party affiliation because of how dynamic the political campaign season can be. But it's one of those rules that favored Hillary Clinton. But already we're hearing complaints from not only the Bernie Sanders campaign, but even New York officials are just talking about all the problems that they had. And a lot of the focus is on Brooklyn, where Bernie Sanders was expected to do very, very strongly. And just 125,000 Democratic voters were dropped from the rolls. In an email to CNN, Sanders' spokesman Karthik Ganapathy called the state's handling of the primary a shameful demonstration, citing long lines, dramatic understaffing, long-time voters being forced to cast affidavit ballots. Remember we were mentioning that yesterday? Oh, the machines are broken. Just put your ballot in the box and we'll process them later. Long lines. It was a disgrace. Another article coming on out of this. This is in Heavy.com. New York election fraud. Is Arizona happening again? And there are just allegations all over this situation. Inactive registrations, and again, like I said, already the lawsuits are flying on this one here. Now, at the last minute, during the latter part of the day yesterday, before the polls closed, voters tried to go to judges to get an injunction to allow them to vote, even though their party affiliations were not what they should have been. And the judges basically didn't do anything. Apparently there was a huge line. People were waiting 20 to 30 minutes trying to get a hearing before a judge to say, hey, this is wrong here. Now, New York set up a vote fraud complaint hotline. They've actually had one all along. And yesterday, the number of complaints was 4 times what it was back in 2012. Now, we had a reader who wrote on in pointing out how Sanders actually was ahead in pretty much the entire state. And yet somehow at the end, Hillary pulls off a popular vote victory and grabs more of the delegates. But here's where it gets interesting, and we even saw this even on Fox News today. Story out of Reader-supported news. Democrats march toward cliff, and they're talking about Hillary's polling numbers, that her disapproval rating, it just continues to soar to what they describe stunning levels. She is down 24 points in the view of unfavorability based on the latest NBC Wall Street Journal poll. And it's hard to imagine somebody who's viewed that unfavorably by a majority of voters thinking she should be in the White House. In fact, it's hard to imagine someone who's viewed that negatively by a majority of voters as getting the votes that she claims to be getting. And it's another reason to suspect that we're once again seeing massive election fraud. Now, earlier today, Debbie Wasserman Schultz was on TV just saying, oh, New York was fine, there's a bunch of whining, but I take deep pride in the way this is being carried out. Now, you remember I used to tell you that if you want to know what's really going on with somebody on TV, turn the sound off and just watch their face. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz's face was a study in fear and worry. She knows they went too far on this one. And everybody is looking at Hillary's success as the result of fraud and political machinery rather than the will of the people. Another article coming out of the Huffington Post. Yes, Bernie Sanders will become president. Hillary Clinton's FBI investigation isn't a nothing burger. And Huffington Post just launches in and says, Hillary is down in the national polls. Her unfavorability ratings are just sky high. And this FBI investigation into her email server and espionage is a criminal investigation. And they just don't see how Hillary can win the election. But, of course, Hillary is trying to steal it, and she's being aided and abetted by Debbie Wasserman Schultz and this whole nonsense of the superdelegates, which we know Hillary got by simply raising a bunch of money from her money junkie friends and making generous donations to the state Democratic parties on the condition that the superdelegates support Hillary Clinton. She's trying to buy the White House. And we need to send a message, not only to Hillary, but everybody else out there who's got a money junkie on their support team. The White House is not for sale. The White House is supposed to go to the people's choice to lead this country. Now, Hillary may be in even more trouble. As you know, Judicial Watch has had to get court orders to secure documents from the State Department, to the point where the judges got so angry with the State Department that they've now granted Judicial Watch discovery powers. In other words, Judicial Watch has the authority to say to the State Department, give me this document, and the State Department doesn't have a right to refuse, unless it's highly classified information. There are now 3 State Department phone transcripts of Hillary Clinton telling various world leaders that Benghazi was a terrorist attack and had nothing to do with that stupid video. And what is really going to come back to haunt Hillary, who postures herself as the champion of women, is her treatment of Patricia Smith, because Hillary told Patricia Smith, the mother of one of the Benghazi victims, that yes, it was a terrorist attack, it had nothing to do with the video. And then when Patricia came out saying Hillary told me it was nothing to do with the video, Hillary Clinton denounced Patricia Smith as a liar on national TV. And now we know it was Hillary who was lying. Now, there's another article. This came out on Fox News, no less. Machiavellian or dumb? Obama's take on Hillary Clinton's emails is hard to figure out. And Fox News makes a very important point about the espionage charge. Because most people think espionage is what you see in the James Bond movies. Legally, espionage is allowing state secrets to be removed from their proper place of custody and placed anywhere else. And it doesn't have to be intentional, and it doesn't have to prove hurt. It can just be negligence. You can be guilty of espionage by negligence, and that's where Hillary Clinton is most vulnerable. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go right to the phones and grab a phone call from Pete in Montana. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, it's Keith.
Oh, it's Keith. I'm sorry. Well, that hamster mistyped it.
Hey, I just had a couple parallels for you here. You know, they always refer to Trump as being like Hitler. Whenever I hear that, I always think about what Hitler did to Germany, bringing Germany out of the Great Depression and putting millions to work and stuff like that. But in lieu of that, I think Trump is more like Gordon Ramsay.
Okay.
And think of that. Ramsay takes over these failed businesses, which is the United States, and of course, everyone is in complete denial. And of course, to do this, he has to change the mindset of people. And of course, he's fought with resistance in every corner like that,
Yes.
But no matter how I look at it, it always looks like Gordon Ramsay, not Hitler. and yeah, he's outspoken. He says things he shouldn't, like that. But it's the same premise,
No, I would agree with you. But I mean, all during this whole campaign, we have been seeing Trump's detractors equate him with Hitler, with Genghis Khan, with Ivan the Terrible, with Darth Vader. I mean, that's all they can really do. But you're absolutely right. Trump comes out of the world of business, and you're either succeeding or you're not, and your word is your bond, and that's a very different environment than politics, where you lie about everything, take credit for things you had nothing to do with, and drop the blame for your mistakes on some lower level clerk. And that's another reason why I think the establishment in Washington, D.C. is afraid of Donald Trump. He's not going to go along with that nonsense. He's going to go right back to that model he had on his reality show. You're fired. If you're not doing the job and you're not doing it right, you're going to be fired. And that is scary to a lot of these career politicians in Washington, D.C., who sit and do nothing all day long on their very generous taxpayer-subsidized salaries. I'll give you one good example that needs a good cleaning out. The Securities and Exchange Commission, which sat on their rear ends for 12 years while Bernie Madoff was cheating his investors. And anytime somebody went over there to check it out, they'd give them a resume. They wanted to get in on the party. Or the Minerals Management Service, that ignored the fact that the blowout preventer on the Deepwater Horizon was 4 years overdue for mandatory maintenance. And we hear all these stories about these various government agencies that aren't actually doing any job. They're just there to make it look good for the corporations like the FDA and the USDA. And they sit around all day long on salaries about 1/3 larger than what you're all making, watching online porn on their taxpayer-funded computers. And it's ridiculous. And all of these people who are living this life of Riley on the taxpayer dollar, they know Donald Trump won't sit for it. Donald Trump will go on in there and say, look, you're either doing something productive, you're accomplishing something, or you're out of here.
Right. Yeah, well, it's the same scenario, though, when you think of Ramsey again, though.
Yes.
The actual premise of his show, like that, is to rescue people that are in complete denial, and that's exactly where we have most of the people in the United States today, in complete denial, whether they're in the la land or worried about transgendered bathrooms. All this stuff is just a distraction like that to keep us from the real issues that are at hand,
Yes, very much so. Okay?
So, anyway, I just thought I'd pass that along. Hope you and Claire are doing well. We'll talk to you later.
We're doing fine, and by the way, Claire's a big fan of Gordon Ramsay. And, yeah, he comes in, he shakes things up, but in the end, it's always better. And I think that's what Trump has the potential for doing. Thanks an awful lot.
Hey, Mike?
Yeah.
One more thing. Remember, though, even Ramsey had lost a few of his restaurants and stuff like that. But as you mentioned there, he not only in corporations like that, he knew how to fail and he knew how to build, and that's the same thing that I look at Donald Trump with.
Yeah, the same thing. I mean, nobody's saying that Trump never made a mistake. Yes, he did. But his strength is he stood up and said, all right, I'm going to try again. And it's unrealistic to say that you're going to have somebody who's a candidate for office who's never messed up, as opposed to Hillary Clinton, whose entire tenure at State Department was one major screw-up after another, and she's still lying to say, oh, no, that was the way it was supposed to be. Really, I did a wonderful job. No, you didn't, Hillary. You're an absolute disaster. Thanks a lot for the phone call, Keith.
Thanks.
We're going to let you go, getting on back here. Now, over on Fox News. Last night, Shepard Smith, on his show, quoted former New York Senator Alphonse D'Amato as saying that the GOP is now planning to change the convention rules in order to allow John Kasich to be considered as a nominee on a second or third round ballot. was only last week that the chairman of the Republican National Committee was saying, oh, we're not going to change any more rules. It's just giving the wrong impression that we're trying to take the nomination away from Trump and give it to somebody else. And here we are. Alphonse D'Amato saying, yeah, the GOP is going to change the rules. And they want, the new rule, all the candidates have to have dark hair. Or some other such nonsense as that. It is an entirely rigged, corrupt system. People are angry in both parties, and they have every right to be. Now, Phyllis Schlafly has released a video. Now, she's been a figurehead of the conservative movement ever since 1964, and she's 91 years old now. And I actually met her once a long, long, long time ago. Do not agree with her on most of what she says. But last March, Phyllis Schlafly endorsed Donald Trump for president at his St. Louis rally. But over at her organization, Eagle Forum, there were apparently a bunch of Cruz supporters that attempted to hold a rogue board meeting and kick her out of her own organization. I mean, that's just how dirty they want to play. Now, only 22 people showed up for Ted Cruz's Philadelphia rally. That was unnerving, I'm sure. And apparently he was being interviewed on the Sean Hannity radio program, and Sean kept pressing him on this issue about grabbing delegates and subverting democracy. And Cruz just kept saying, oh, no, only Trump's people are whining about that. Everybody else understands this is the way the system is supposed to be. You go and pretend to vote for a delegate, and then we'll pick the delegates, and the delegates will give you the president that you're supposed to have. And apparently Sean Hannity kept pushing him until the point Cruz had a meltdown right on the radio show and started screaming. And if you know anything at all about politics, the last thing a candidate can ever allow themselves to do is lose their temper in front of a microphone or a camera. And so that is working against him. And the reality is probably more and more people are now becoming aware. Ted Cruz is not a natural-born U.S. citizen. He cannot serve as president or vice president. And certainly it looks like the New York voters understood that yesterday. Because the corrupted court system may look the other way, but the voters have that final say. Now, the Trump campaign is accusing the Cruz campaign of an attempt to steal even more delegates down in Georgia, and saying this is not grassroots activism, which is what Cruz's people are trying to describe it as. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as we mentioned before the commercial break here, you need to remember, when Georgia had their primary, Donald Trump won by a huge, huge margin. Now the Trump campaign is accusing Ted Cruz's people of mounting an organized program, if you will, in Georgia, basically trying to challenge and discredit pro-Trump delegate candidates and get them kicked out so that there's nothing left but Cruz delegates. Now, the Cruz campaign is actually calling this grassroots activism, which it is not. Grassroots activism is what you're doing with the voters themselves, not the delegates. And it's just incredibly crooked, and I think America's beginning to recognize that's exactly what's going on. And that may be another reason for Cruz's poor showing in New York yesterday, where he got fewer votes than Ben Carson, who has already dropped out of the race. Now, Fox News is saying that Ted Cruz is about to have a meeting with the RNC leadership at what they call the RNC spring meeting. And it looks to me like the RNC leadership, especially with D'Amato's comment about changing the rules to allow Kasich to be considered, is the RNC leadership is beginning to realize that Ted Cruz's scandals, his natural-born citizenship issue, his extramarital affairs, his general kookiness about religion is catching up with him. And his star, if you will, is on the wane. And all the election fraud and delegate stealing is not going to put him over the top. So Ted Cruz is probably going to go on in there and scream how he's God's anointed choice to be president of the United States, which begs the question why God had him born up in Canada. Now, Bill Kristol is out there warning Ted Cruz to stop being so cavalier about this snatching delegates. Ted Cruz thinks they're being clever. It's grassroots activism. We're being clever. We're being very clever about how we're hijacking the delegate process. And Bill Crystal is out there saying, do you realize how this makes you look to the voting public? Like you don't care what the voters want anymore. And that, too, I think, is another reason why Cruz got such a drubbing in New York. And why over in Pennsylvania, where they're coming up on their primary, 22 people showed up for Ted Cruz's rally. Now, speaking of Pennsylvania, there's more shenanigans going on over there. On their ballot, and if you are in Pennsylvania, please make a point of grabbing this story, and there's a link inside you need to save. When you are voting in the Pennsylvania primary, they don't have boxes saying Ted Cruz or Donald Trump. What they have is a list of delegates, and you can vote for a delegate. The ballot does not tell you who the delegate is supporting, which means the voters actually have no idea whether they're supporting Trump or Cruz when they pick a delegate. That's it. But somebody's gone to the trouble of putting together this spreadsheet. It's inside this article, important information on the Pennsylvania primary, where they basically list all the delegates, and they point out the ones who are pro-Cruz, the ones who are pro-Trump, and the ones who are basically saying we're going to go with the will of the voter, which is what they're supposed to be doing. But that's a very dumb way to be running a primary, where the voter doesn't actually know, is given no information about whether the delegates on that list, which candidate they support. It seems to be a glaring omission of information. By the way, little reminder, Ted Cruz once made a claim that he lost his health insurance due to Obamacare, which happened to a lot of people. As it turns out, it was another fib. So, anyway. Now, getting on over to the war zones, emphasis on the plural. It is getting very, very tense out there. The Syrian army is advancing on ISIS positions near Damascus. Somebody had a drone that they were flying over the Syrian positions, getting targeting information. The drone apparently is unidentified at this point. Meanwhile, Turkey is beginning to expand its shelling operation against the Kurds, and they are killing Syrian civilians in the process. It's just outright. Article coming out of Journal Neo, Washington's fake war on ISIS moves to Libya. They've lost their beachhead on the Middle East in Syria for all intents and purposes. Now they're going to go back into Libya. And they've got an excuse. Oh, ISIS is there. Al-Qaeda is. We have to go after ISIS. And here's where it gets really, really dark. This is over at antiwar.com. As you know, every time a video has surfaced showing that U.S. drone strikes are killing civilians, the Pentagon will put on their frowny face and they'll say, we're really sorry. We are so sorry. We try so hard not to kill innocent civilians. But, according to this article on antiwar.com, the Pentagon has now changed the rules of engagement, which will allow them to kill more civilians in ISIS strikes. So when they drone strike somebody they think maybe kind of sort of might be ISIS, and they used to kill 20 to 30 innocent civilians around them, now it's going to be 100. It is totally out of control. All right, let's grab ourselves a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Yeah, Ted Cruz has not got a chance in New Jersey either. It's going to go Trump also. People need to realize Ted Cruz's wife is like a member of the Council of Foreign Relations.
She used to work for Goldman Sachs. I mean, she stepped down when that became a liability for his campaign. But, yeah, I mean, it's all the same bunch of people. You know, politicians and corrupt politicians and corrupt bankers and, you know, all these various cliques, these little clubs that they all belong to where they plot the takeover of the world and the plundering of your pockets.
Hey, Mike, I wanted to change subjects onto this changing of Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill, like, why now? Of all, like in the financial situation we're in, like with Intel's laying off 12,000 people, Nordstrom's in trouble. At this particular moment in time, why now? Why now?
Well, you know, they're also talking about Martin Luther King and Eleanor Roosevelt maybe decorating the paper money, and it kind of signals that this war on cash may have stumbled badly if they're talking about changing the currency. But the U.S. Treasury likes to change the currency every once in a while, and yes, there's big political points to be made on whose face is going to be on there. Mostly, though, it's about trying to stay ahead of the counterfeiters, which includes the counterfeiters over at the Central Intelligence Agency. Because remember when they came out with the new $100 bill with that wonderful little hologram on there that makes you seasick when you look at it, and the little colored strip and everything, and that was supposed to be counterfeit-proof, and almost immediately it was being duplicated with tremendous success. So I think it's kind of a side issue. I mean, I'd like to see Andrew Jackson stay on the bill because I have a lot of regard. But when you realize that Andrew Jackson shut down the second bank of the United States, you can understand why the Treasury and the Federal Reserve would just as soon try and erase him from history.
Yeah, Mike, they should just put on there, "This is your God," on the other side, "Obey."
Well, yes, I'm just a little piece of paper, and I control your life. That should be the new motto up above there, instead of "In God We Trust."
Yeah, it's for they live, you know, like, "This is your God." You
Yes.
have special glasses. Hey, Mike, you know, I was going to call you on Tuesday and tell you it was Tuesday, Soil Ain't Greenback Day. Yeah, because of the Chinese yuan gold going.
The yuan going
gold.
gold, yeah. Well, we haven't seen a lot of repercussions from that yet, but I think it's going to be coming. There are all these emergency meetings going on among all these top bankers. It feels like something's in the wind. We don't know what it is yet, but it feels like something big is about to happen. Got to let you go, Justin. Got to take a 4-minute break for commercials. We'll be back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call from Sean in North Carolina. Aloha. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike. I wanted to talk a little bit about the 28 pages. Do we need to re-evaluate this? Because I know you've said over and over and over that it doesn't make any sense that Saudi Arabia would have anything to do with it, because if they wanted to hurt the United States, they would just have to take, just request their money back, and legally they could get it.
Yes.
Now you're hearing all in the news that, they're under heat, making threats to our government about people finding out about it and then.
No. The Western media is trying to spin it that, Saudi Arabia has something to cover up. And that is absolute nonsense. Saudi Arabia understands that every nation the United States wants to invade, they first frame with 9/11. First it was Afghanistan. Oh, we got to conquer Afghanistan. Gee, they didn't do 9/11. It was Iraq. Let's go into Iraq. And they trashed Iraq. And then George Bush got on TV and said, no, Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. So Saudi Arabia understands that if the U.S. is pushing this fraud to drop the blame for 9/11 on them, it precedes a potential invasion. And Saudi Arabia only has one real weapon with which to defend itself, and that's the threat to withdraw their money. And what we're looking at happening between this harebrained judge that said Iran has to pay $2 billion for the Beirut bombing attack, even in the absence of any evidence Iran had anything to do with it. They're setting a legal precedent that U.S. courts can accuse a government of an act of terror and seize their assets inside the U.S. as a result, without due process, without any kind of consideration that maybe it was a false flag. And if they're trying to establish that precedent, then we're looking at the United States government at some point saying, we think Saudi Arabia did 9/11, and we hereby confiscate the $750 billion they have in our banking system. And I think Saudi Arabia understands it. And this could backfire, because every other nation with money inside the U.S. financial system is going to say, hey, we better get our cash out while we still can.
I see. Well, why do you think our dictator is over there right now in Saudi Arabia?
Well, because I think he's trying to figure out some way to keep Saudi Arabia from pulling their money out in case Congress comes up with a veto-proof majority on this bill. Because Israel is pushing for this, and whatever Israel wants in the U.S. Congress, they're going to get. And so Obama may be telling the Saudi government that the U.S. will very covertly, clandestinely reimburse them for any lawsuit settlements that are forthcoming, which means ultimately you, the taxpayer, are going to pick up the tab for all this nonsense.
Of course. All right, Mike, thanks a lot.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch over here to Clinton, Nevada. Aloha. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just want to add on to this 28-page thing because I've been listening to GCN, you and Alex and Jeff Rentz and all you guys since '04. You know, now all of a sudden it's them. Well, I remember a guy put out a video, I think it was 9/11 martial law, rise of the police state, where there's other countries implicated in this at a certain level. But here's 2 points I want to make. Are these 28 pages written by the same people that wrote the other 571 pages?
We don't really know. That's another part of it. What they're carrying around the 28 pages, they could have been written by the same people who wrote the original report. They could have been written up in an office last week for all we know. There's no provenance on any of this. It's just, it's like Joseph McCarthy. I have a list of names in my briefcase. And they just wave that around. And there's a very alarming story that came out of the Daily Mail where they're now claiming there is new evidence that links the Saudi government to 9/11 because the flight certificate of a would-be bomber was found in an embassy envelope buried underground, which that's a bit of a stretch. First of all, anybody can walk into any embassy and get an envelope. Second, how did they find it if it was buried underground? And again, the issue here is why would Saudi Arabia, which has grown very rich out of its relationship with the United States, decide they're going to attack the United States? And more to the point, why attack with airplanes crashing into buildings, which would allow the U.S. government to seize Saudi Arabia's wealth inside the U.S., as opposed to just taking it back, which would be legal and moral for Saudi Arabia to do? This thing is...
Well, then there's the mechanics of it. How the hell did Saudi Arabia rig CIA headquarters in New York City?
Yeah, there's that aspect of it. I mean, there are the dancing Israelis, the Mossad agents who were arrested, cheering and clapping while the buildings came down. And let's not forget how the Secret Service failed to react down at that school in Sarasota, Florida, where Andy Card comes in and tells President Bush, who's down there reading about pet goats, that a second plane has crashed into a second building, and at that point, according to the official story, everybody knows there's a terror attack underway. And the Secret Service doesn't do anything at all. They let Bush sit there waiting to make his speech, and there's an airport just 4 miles away. Now, if you look at the video of how quickly the Secret Service moved when there was the attempt on Reagan, or that guy who jumped the line at Trump's rally, they're trained to react immediately without hesitation whatsoever. And yet from the Secret Service not doing anything at all at that school in Florida, it's obvious they knew Bush was not a target. And the only way they could know that is they knew what the targets were going to be that day. So we have both Israel and the United States working together to create this false flag that was going to launch the century of unending warfare being called for by the Project for the New American Century.
Yeah. And why would Saudi be so mad at us? They make so much money off it.
That's exactly it. There's no motive. There's no motive.
Yeah. And then you have the war games. You have the stand down of our air defense system, no matter how it was done. You have the fact that the buildings were brought down. The cover-up aspect, they took all the steel to China. I don't think Saudi Arabia did that.
No, they didn't do that. Anyway, listen, Clint.
Appoint the 9/11 Commission.
Okay, Clint, we got to let you go here because we're running out of time here, and I want to switch over to James in Ohio. Aloha. What's on your mind?
Hi. Well, today's the day that a child was born in Braunau am in Austria, so let me destroy the gas chambers for you.
Okay.
In a few brief minutes. The Zyklon B is purposefully confused in the in media with the cyanide used in gas chambers in the U.S. penal system.
Well, yeah, you're right, but let's be honest and accurate. Zyklon B is a cyanide compound, but it's designed to interact on insects. It's they were using it as a delousing tool because as Germany's infrastructure fell apart toward the end of the war, they brought typhus back with them from the failed campaign against Russia. And they had to kill the body lice that were the primary vector for spreading typhus. And typhus was killing everybody in Germany, was killing everybody in the camps, not just the prisoners, even the guards and the camp staff were being killed by it, and they were having to fumigate their clothes and their bodies with this stuff to try and stop the disease.
here's the important part. In the penal system gas chambers, you had a reaction which produced a vigorous and instantaneous release of a large amount of hydrogen cyanide. Zyklon B was balls of diatomaceous earth or wood dust into which a small amount of hydrogen cyanide was absorbed, and it takes from 1 to 3 days to delouse a building, which brings to mind the camp guard shouting, standing outside for 2.5 days shouting through the door, just 5 more minutes, just 5 more minutes. I think these people might have died from boredom. And furthermore,
listen, we're almost at the end of the hour. There's one more thing that everybody has to remember. Cyanide is the source of the color cyan, that beautiful blue color. And any place that you use cyanide, there will be that blue stain. It is not visible on any of these artifacts that are constantly being wagged at us about the Nazis and so forth. Anyway, listen, James, thank you very much. We're going to let you go and do the rest of that. Okay, story coming out of Russia today. The European Union has now given Poland a green light to ramp up tensions with Russia. And in true Orwellian speak, the EU is telling Poland to provoke Russia as a defense against Russian aggression. And I cannot tell you what a stupid idea war with Russia and China is going to be. The U.S. is militarily exhausted, economically exhausted. We can't do it, and that means there's going to be a nuclear war. All in this argument over whose brand of ink and paper we all use for the next 100 years. Got to take a break for news and commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. The demonization of Saudi Arabia is well and truly underway. Over at CNN on their money page, they have an article about Saudi Arabia's money ties to the U.S. are massive and murky. Oh, those Saudis, they've been putting their money into the United States. It must be for nefarious reasons. And the reality is that Saudi Arabia investing the dollars that they sold their oil for in the United States was part of the petrodollar deal. And now it's being presented as a bad thing. So they're getting ready to do something. And Saudi Arabia, which has been the U.S. handmaiden in the Middle East for many, many years, is about to learn a very, very hard lesson. That when it comes to the U.S. government, and for that matter Israel, loyalty is entirely a one-way street. You must be loyal to Washington, D.C. You must be loyal to Tel Aviv, but don't you dare expect any of it coming back here. Now, speaking of Israel, Netanyahu is still maintaining that Israel is going to keep the Golan Heights. And he's willing to defy all of his allies, including the United States and Germany and others, to just basically say, this is now ours. Basically what Netanyahu is saying is we stole it fair and square, and now that we know it has all that oil, we are going to keep it. And anybody who wants us to give it back to Syria is just being a dirty, filthy, Jew-hating anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the ovens. Now, the Arab League is getting ready to hold an emergency meeting over Netanyahu's remarks. It was one thing for Israel to be illegally occupying the Golan Heights and quite another for Israel to simply say, it's ours now, including all that oil. And the Arab League is very, very nervous about this. Now remember, one of the things underlying the petrodollar deal was that all of these oil nations would sell their oil only for the U.S. dollar, and in exchange, the U.S. would restrain Israel from territorial ambitions. If Israel grabs the Golan, it's the end of the petrodollar deal. And all these nations are going to start selling their oil in whatever currencies the buyers wish to use, even though the U.S. made an example out of Saddam Hussein for selling Iraq's oil for the euro, and made an example out of Gaddafi for selling Libya's oil for the gold dinar. Now, Syria, up at the Geneva peace talks, which have already been put on hold to crank the war back up again, Syria is accusing Israel of actively cooperating with the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda saying that Israel is taking weapons through the Golan and smuggling them into Syria, which has been supported by the finding of Israeli equipment and supplies in these various bases that are evacuated by the so-called Syrian opposition here. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a couple of phone calls. Pete in Florida, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike, I'm very curious. There seem to be a lot of similarities between the way the U.S. government decides to interpret a law. Case in point was the earlier mention you made about how now the U.S. armed forces can be, more vague in how they blow people up over there in the Middle East, and the similarities between that and what goes on in Israel and the way they can treat the Palestinians. I asked you a question a couple weeks ago or last week. Is there anything in the U.S. Constitution that explicitly calls out punishment for government employees? And you responded eloquently, but however, the idea that we have to look to lower courts or statutes or this and that, I'm literally, Mike, looking to the Constitution itself, and where is it in there that we could just punish the hell out of these people who are violating the Constitution?
Well, we can't punish them. There are procedures for the impeachment of the president and the vice president, various other officials, various judges, at which point they would then be subject to criminal prosecution for any violations they have committed of United States laws or treaty obligations. But there isn't anything specifically in the Constitution regarding the form of the punishment. The Constitution is just supposed to be that core framework around which everything else is being built. The problem is our current government tends to ignore it. And when the people complain, they say, well, we've got a judge that interprets Second Amendment as applying only this or that. But there's a little fact that Americans need to remember. The Constitution does not give the courts exclusive right or jurisdiction to interpret the Constitution. It's our Constitution. It says so right at the top. We the people. This is our Constitution. And we can interpret it just fine for ourselves. And the Supreme Court is not given the authority to be the final arbiter of the interpretation of the Constitution. They simply grabbed it for themselves to try and disenfranchise ordinary people from saying, hey, this or that is not constitutional.
But that's great. But my point is, I almost feel like listening to you and other notable figures in the alternative media, my friend.
Okay.
As sort of the halt monitors saying, oh, look, here's what's going on there. Here's what's going on there. There's another roach there. There's another roach there. Like, how do we there's nothing in place legally unless we rise up, and I know you don't want that,
no.
But I'm ready to, 6-year submarine sailor, so I'm ready to rise up, my friend. And I'm saying maybe we do need to apply some, I don't know how we apply force, Mike, without applying literal force.
Well, you're absolutely right, and that is always inevitably the conundrum that you have to face when you want to bring about changes to a society where the rulers of the society are happy with the way things are, and all I can do is keep going back to that quote from John F. Kennedy. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. And it does seem that we are on that path because the people who are running our country for their own personal glory and financial benefit don't want anything to change at all. That's why they're trying to basically disconnect the voters from the election process. They're absolutely scared out of their minds about Donald Trump. They think the system works just fine because it does work for them. It's making them richer and more powerful, and they think that's the way it should be.
Although Jacob Lew decided that he thought Harriet Tubman would be better fit than Andrew Jackson, obviously because Andrew Jackson stood up to the banksters.
Well, they're claiming the reason that Jackson is being taken off the currency is because he owned slaves, forgetting, of course, that back at that time slavery was perfectly legal and acceptable. But you know, they're out there just pandering to the black vote and the women vote and the rest of it in this election year. Anyway, Pete, need to let you go. We're almost out of time, and I want to take this phone call from Ronnie in Nevada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. Well, anyway, we've heard from our illustrious Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. Dude, isn't that scary?
Yep.
He says, we're going to clamp down on the people that owe the taxes. And I'm going to have income tax reform this year sometime, I promise. Okay, but if you want to clamp down on the people that owe the back taxes, why don't you start with the corrupt government people that got their money in Panama that aren't paying their taxes?
Oh, we can't do that. They're generous campaign donors. Taxes are only for the little people. I mean, that's the message that's coming on out from all this nonsense. You know, that the leaders of nations, the ultra-rich, the celebrities and the athletes, they're above the law, they're above the taxes. Laws and taxes are only for you, the slaves, so you might as well get used to it. And it's not America, and anybody who wants to go on out and run a search, it's just a huge, gigantic scam. And I recommend a movie called America from Freedom to Fascism by Aaron Russo. And it's just an absolute thorough exploration of just what an absolute joke this whole system is. And it's all about taking money away from ordinary people to make the rich richer than they already are. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the sabers are rattling very, very hard right now. I'm looking at an article out of Press TV. Military will respond to intimidation. Russia is basically saying that if NATO goes on provoking, Russia will be forced to respond. Of course, when that happens, the establishment media will say, Russia's attacking, Russia's attacking, we have to go to war, send us your children and your money, we have to protect you from those evil Russians. Blah, 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 blah. Now then, another story, this one coming out of Asia Times. China is now deploying thousands of troops along the Chinese border with North Korea. And the concern is that Pyongyang is getting ready for a fifth nuclear test. And China has previously deployed troops along its border with North Korea. Now, China is not going to invade North Korea, and it's not concerned that North Korea is going to try and invade China. But they are sending a message. And they have already indicated ahead of time, if North Korea starts a war, they are on their own. China refuses to get involved. And putting the soldiers along the border is just a way of punctuating that. All right. Moving on down here just a little bit. We're going to talk about the economy. Remember earlier in the show I was talking about there's all these weird things that are going on here and all these emergency meetings of Yellen and Obama and Biden and the heads of all these central banks, Wall Street firms and everything. The Federal Reserve has now come out declaring J.P. Morgan to be a threat to the financial stability of the United States. Now, this is a major, major reversal because up until now, J.P. Morgan has been considered one of the too big to fail, too big to jail pillars of Wall Street. And apparently the problem is, despite Jamie Dimon's insistence that J.P. Morgan has plenty of liquidity, J.P. Morgan and a bunch of other banks failed the most recent stress test. The U.S. economy, the banking system, is vulnerable to any kind of a financial upset. Now, Intel, the chip maker, has announced 12,000 layoffs and a massive reorganization. PC sales are down, and everyone was hoping Windows 10 was going to jumpstart PC sales again and laptop sales and everything, and it hasn't happened. We don't have an economy that supports getting the newest gizmo every 3 to 5 years. People are hanging on to their computers, their TVs, their cars, their washing machines, and they're just using them as long as they possibly can because we don't have the money to support a planned obsolescence economy anymore. And unfortunately, these industries that grew rich on planned obsolescence are a little slow on the uptake of that. Yahoo has reported a loss of $99 million in the last 3 months. This is coming out of governmentslaves.info. And even Goldman Sachs is in trouble. And there's this article coming out of Bloomberg, no less. Blankfeins' decade ending with a thud on a humbled Wall Street. And they're talking about how Wall Street's fortunes, which were soaring leading up to that 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud, have been in decline. And despite all the rigging to keep the stock market looking healthy, the actual bottom line solvency and liquidity of these many Wall Street firms is in trouble. And Lloyd Blankfein may be on the verge of losing his position. Another article coming out of safehaven.com, Walmart, how the retail giant has faltered. And they have a very wonderful quote in there. And it seems to be wisdom that most of our American retailers and manufacturers have forgotten about. Walmart's founder, Sam Walton, once said, there is only one boss, the customer. And he can fire everybody in the company from the chairman on down simply by spending his or her money somewhere else. It's a much more flowery way of saying the customer is always right, which was the retail wisdom when I was a kid. But apparently because of bad decisions, poor quality products, and just the fact that people don't have money anymore, Walmart is also in trouble. The whole system is locking up because all of the wealth, all of the currency has been piled up at the very top of the pyramid. And there's nothing left down here on which the commerce can function. I mean, they're willing to loan you more money at interest, but people don't want to borrow anymore. They want jobs. They want to have a mechanism by which the wealth that is accumulated at the top of the economic pyramid can be recycled back to the bottom in decent wages and salaries so that workers can pump it back into the economy at those shopping malls. And under fascism, that recycling mechanism is the first thing to be destroyed. And that's where we are right now. Over in France, tax authorities have hit the McDonald's Corporation with a tax bill for 300 million euro of unpaid taxes, which they say they are owed because McDonald's was using a branch in Luxembourg as a tax shelter. Maybe this was in the Panama Papers. I don't really know, but that's a 300 million euro bill. That's a lot of Big Macs. And all of a sudden, I'll bet that $15 an hour minimum wage doesn't seem like such a big issue to McDonald's management. McDonald's could be another American icon on the verge of collapsing as this economy comes apart. Meanwhile, for all you metals fans out there, American Silver Eagle sales continue at record pace through mid-April. Silver is going up, especially following the admission by Deutsche Bank that gold and silver prices were being rigged. Gold is still struggling, but silver has hit an 11-month high, and in fact, it is increasing in value faster than gold is. Now, as you know, China has launched their gold-backed yuan. They are insisting that at least within China itself, it will not be convertible to or from the U.S. dollar. We're not seeing any major repercussions yet, but I think the true impact of this is going to be felt over time as more and more countries drop the use of the dollar and switch to the yuan. Hungary just issued a sovereign bond denominated in the Chinese yuan. And finally, getting on back to a rough economy, forcing corporations to make poor decisions, Mitsubishi is now caught up in a scandal of faking mileage tests for as many as 625,000 vehicles, and the faking was intentional. Now, this had nothing to do with onboard computer code or anything like that. The people who were doing the mileage tests on the cars were simply overinflating the tires to dangerous levels. And when your tire is overinflated, your mileage goes way up, but you don't have a lot of traction. It's very dangerous to drive on overinflated tires, and you can have a blowout. But that's what they did, and so now Mitsubishi is having to deal with that as well. Now, in the Eurozone, we are getting signals from the Dutch Parliament. They're going to ignore the will of the Dutch voters and proceed with ratification on this European Union deal with Ukraine. And we are seeing an epidemic around the globe of this, to heck with what the voters want, we're going to do what we think is in our own best interests. And they're pushing toward a global revolt with this kind of abuse. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Glenn in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I don't think I've said this before, but every time you talk about the circulation of money, you remind me of the old Broadway show and movie, Hello, Dolly. In the movie, Barbara Streisand starred as Dolly, and Walter Matthau starred as a character named Horace Vandergelder. whose name means from the money.
Yes.
So Mathau's a well-moneyed, high society, multimillionaire kind of guy, and Barbara Streisand is chasing him. And at one point, he addresses the topic of money and says that money is sort of like manure. It's not much use unless you spread it around.
Yes. And
I mean, if something so simple can be articulated so clearly, what part of that don't these people understand? And it's to everybody's benefit, for it to circulate, and to even their detriment if they don't allow it to circulate. And it's very simple. Why don't they get it?
Well, because they're trapped by their greed and their addiction to other people's wealth. They're absolutely convinced that Adam Smith was right, that you can be personally greedy and somehow it benefits society as a whole, even though John Nash absolutely destroyed that theory with his doctoral dissertation. But people who are, greedy and power mad, they want to believe that what they're doing is somehow right. Lloyd Blankfein was out there saying that what Goldman Sachs was doing was God's work, even as they were defrauding the investors in the mortgage-backed securities and triggering this firestorm of foreclosures. And if you look at any addict, okay, they always come up with amazing justifications why they're not really addicts and what they're doing is okay and it's fine to be the way that they are. But when we're on the outside, we look at them and we realize this behavior is pathological. And when you realize that these addicts are running the show in this country, you begin to understand why we're in such trouble.
Right, exactly. There is such a thing as enlightened self-interest. And when it takes the benefit of the other and not just the self into account. And you can benefit yourself by including the well-being of others. That's the fundamental principle that makes, benevolence and good things circulate throughout any society and any economy.
Well, that's what Henry Ford said. Henry Ford used to say that the best way to become prosperous is to make your community around you prosper. And he was absolutely right.
Yeah, that whole love God, love your neighbor as yourself thing kind of works, actually. See you later. Bye.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now then, we've been talking about the Brexit, the Drexit, the Frexit. Now it's the Swexit. Swedish support for remaining in the European Union is plummeting because of the immigration problem, the refugee crisis. And it's down now to just 39% of Swedes believe that being part of the European Union is a positive thing. This is down from 60% just last autumn. It's all coming apart. What's Brussels going to do? Invade all these countries and drag them back into the Union? Well, it was okay for Abraham Lincoln to do it, so we're going to do it here. Now, a little bit of good news. Nebraska has just abolished the practice of civil forfeiture. They just passed a new law saying that before the police can confiscate your property, there must be a criminal conviction in a court of law. That's a huge step forward because we know that under the existing civil forfeiture system, the police are actually stealing more from the American people than the muggers and robbers and burglars all put together. Now, remember when I said part of the New World Order agenda is to dismiss our history and to blur it, and certainly within the U.S. government, which wants to find some way where they can get rid of the Constitution and they're going to just dismiss it all. It's becoming very, very obvious. Story out of PJ Media. Apparently, over at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, where the Constitution was created and signed, a National Park Service guide leading the tourists around the building was insulting the founders and telling them that the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence were just class elites who wanted to protect their privileges. And that's all it is. They're already selling the propaganda that, gee, the Declaration and Constitution, we shouldn't bother with that. And again, I want to make a point here. The authority of the federal government over the American people rests on that Constitution. If they toss that in the shredder, their legitimacy goes along with it. Now, you know how the gun grabbers are always going on about, oh, guns are bad, we got to get the guns, oh, we got to... Over in Colorado, the Douglas County school system has purchased 10 military-style semi-automatic rifles, they're AR-15 derivatives, for its school security officers. Now, what's that going to do to a little kid's head to go to school, struggle with Common Core, and you've got uniformed guys walking around with military weapons? Are they in school or are they in a prisoner of war camp? And the gun grabbers are just really going nuts here. And the latest nonsense is coming out of Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Democrat of New York. And she has come out with a statement saying that the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms is now irrelevant because gun control has become a woman's issue. And in her mind, if the women of America want a gun ban, well, then the Constitution just has to step aside and be subordinate to that. It's utterly, utterly ridiculous. Little problem over at the White House is, you know, they've been talking about the Secret Service and a bunch of goofs, and apparently the turnover rate is really out of control. And I remember all the stories about how the Clintons were abusing the Secret Service, and I guess it must be worse under the Obamas, because the United States Secret Service can't hire enough new personnel to keep pace with historic attrition rates. Maybe that explains the less than impressive individual they had checking Claire and I out a few Christmases ago. Now, as you know, they're making a big deal over the fact that 3 officials have now been charged in the Flint water crisis. Basically, they've come on out with charges against 2 state officials and 1 city official involving evidence tampering and other offenses that led to this. Now, interestingly enough, Michigan Attorney General Bill Chouette, who announced the charges, saying, this is a road back to restoring faith and confidence in all Michigan families in their government. No, it isn't. The road back requires safe drinking water coming out of every single faucet. See, what's going on here is the firefighter analogy. The government waits until something becomes a scandal, then they'll rush on in and say, we're going to prosecute the people. The government's job was to prevent that problem from happening in the first place. But they were too busy taking their tax money and giving it to Wall Street and the war machine and to Israel. And they got caught at it, and now they're going to huff up and say, we must do something about this. Now, there's another story that came out of Freep.com that this may not end with just these officials who were charged today. That they're in all probability going to roll over on higher-ups who were issuing the orders, saying, we've got to save money, just unplug and, put the pipe in the river, and, to heck with those people. And, yes, the pipes are corroded, and we can't put the chemical in there to make it safe. So this is, and again, it's not confined to Flint. Erin Brockovich and her organization say they are finding thousands and thousands of cities all across America where the water coming out of your faucets is dangerous to drink. High lead levels and the damage caused by lead poisoning is permanent. It is irreversible. And the government allowed this to happen to save a few bucks. So, we'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, have you noticed something kind of bizarre going on about this whole lead story? I mean, the national media, they're freaking out about it. And probably the reason they're doing that is because they're realizing their tap water is probably in as much trouble. And a reminder for those of you who are coming onto this issue a little bit late. You can go out on the Internet and you can get a water testing kit for about $20 that will test for lead, microbe content, all kinds of things. About 6 or 8 different tests in there. And you can test your own water, and that way you will know if what is coming out of your tap is something you want to be feeding your kids. Now, we tested our water here. It came out as excessively hard, which is to be expected. We're sucking it from inside an extinct volcano. But we have very good water here in Hawaii. But if you cannot get any kind of accurate information from your local water board, and I'm sure they'll have a little web page saying, oh, our water's wonderful, but they had that same thing in Flint. But you might want to test your water. And so everybody is kind of in an uproar because all of a sudden they're wondering, have I been drinking contaminated water in my home? But have you noticed that as vocal as the establishment media is about this lead poisoning in Flint and all these other cities, this is the same media that has for decades remained totally silent on the inclusion of mercury in vaccines. And basically, one example, back in 2014, using a mass spectrometer, Mike Adams at the Health Ranger found that the flu-aval vaccines contained upward of 51 parts per million of mercury. That's 25,000 times the legal maximum for drinking water. And you don't drink the vaccine, you shoot it into your arm. And a lot of people have been talking about what's going on with the vaccines, and the corporate media won't touch it for a very simple reason. Pharmaceutical companies are some of the biggest advertisers on TV and in newspapers. Huge amounts of money. And the media doesn't want to cut off that bit of revenue. They can report on the lead in the drinking water, and they're not going to lose ad revenue because of it. They report on the negative aspects of vaccines, oh, they're going to lose all that advertising money. And that is one of the many reasons why right now only 6% of Americans trust the establishment media anymore. That's a lousy, lousy number. Now, we had Robert De Niro, who, as part of his apology for yanking Vaxxed from the Tribeca Film Festival, came on out talking about his autistic child and what he sees as a link to vaccines. Then we had Aidan Quinn, who came on out and said, perfectly healthy kid, got the vaccine, brain damage. Now we have Bob Wright, the former CEO of NBC Universal, is out with a new book in which he relates a story about how his grandson, perfectly healthy child, got the standard one-year vaccinations, immediately developed a high fever, started screaming. They had to put the kid in an ice bath trying to control it. They called the doctor. The doctor said the reaction is completely normal. High fever and screaming, yeah, that's a normal reaction for the vaccine. And the kid is now autistic. This is starting to come down. This whole facade of the medicines are safe. And here's a good one for you. Do you remember back in 2015, there was a sudden spate of children here in the United States being stricken by a mysterious paralysis illness. And they kept saying it's a polio-like illness, but trust us, it's not polio. These kids could not have polio. They had the polio vaccine. We don't know what it is, but it can't be polio. It looks like polio. It has the symptoms of polio, but it can't be polio because they've got the polio vaccine. Okay? That was last year. Now, today, story out of Blacklisted News. Apparently, scientists have admitted the polio vaccine was causing polio. They're rapidly trying to destroy the existing stocks around the world. 155 countries. They're destroying the vaccine by boiling it or incinerating it. I mean, we cannot trust the big corporate medical industrial complex. They're all about making money. They're all about selling you product. They're not interested in what's actually good for you. And here is another example. This came out of Alternet. It might not be dementia. How pharma for seniors can go seriously wrong. And the article is talking about how as people get older and they have more medical problems and the doctors will prescribe more medications, that the medications in combination can cause symptoms such as falling down, dizziness, memory loss, that are misdiagnosed as dementia, leading to these seniors being committed to homes. And they're not really suffering dementia. They're suffering side effects. And there's a new book out talking about the problem of polypharmacy, of simply being given too many drugs by too many doctors that have serious, serious interaction issues. It's all about the money. I'm going to share a story with you. As you know, my wife Claire is a musician, and a performer. And many years ago, we went through a very ugly incident where all of a sudden she started experiencing serious joint pain in her feet and in her hands, to the point where she couldn't actually play music any longer, which if you are an artist of any kind, you know that's your first death. And part of what we did, this is when I encouraged Claire to go into the computer MIDI paradigm so she could still create music despite the pain in the hands. And we went the orthodox medical route, doctors, and they kept saying, oh, it's some form of arthritis, we're not sure. Here's a pill, here's a cream. She was prescribed some stuff off-label, special shoes, and we went for about 4 years dealing with this. And finally, I just started doing my own research because the x-rays of her hands didn't show arthritis, even though that's what the doctor said was going on. So I did a little bit of research, and I came to find out that my wife, Claire, has sensitivities to formaldehyde. Now, formaldehyde is a nasty chemical. It's used as embalming fluid, but it's also used in a lot of products because it tends to naturally polymerize and it makes things goopy. It's also a carcinogen. But as long as it makes money and people are buying the products, that's really okay. Now, finally, they're starting to catch up on the formaldehyde. It is now banned for use as a glue in baby shoes. But formaldehyde poisoning includes serious joint pain as a problem. And so we just did an experiment. We went through the house. We learned all the different names of what are called formaldehyde precursors. These are chemicals put in low-end cosmetics and household products which basically decay over time, producing formaldehyde, so the product has a longer shelf life. It can sit on the shelf in the store longer, doesn't have to be thrown out, maximizes profitability. And we threw all that stuff out, and it was like a switch was thrown. The pain was gone. Claire was back to playing music. We've had to be very vigilant about these products ever since. Not one of those doctors we went to ever broached the subject that there was something that needed to be taken away from Claire's environment. It was always another pill you've got to buy, another cream you have to try, another shoe, another brace, another this, another that, money, 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 money. And we do live in a very toxic society. There's all kinds of dangerous chemicals, even in our tap water, and they're tolerated because it's all part of maximizing the flow of money from you to those corporations who will then kick back part of the take as generous campaign donations to the various politicians. And when people say that maybe we don't want to have this product, we've heard it's dangerous, then they pass laws saying, oh, you must have it. You must take these 8 vaccines and pump them into your child. And if he develops a spiking fever and starts screaming his head off, that's the normal reaction, and you shouldn't be concerned about that at all. But if the kid dies, oh, it must be shaken baby syndrome, and we're going to throw you in prison after the trauma of losing your child. Can you see just how brutal and ruthless the ruling strata of our society have become? When a certain amount of dead children or crippled children is an acceptable cost of doing business. There's the music. We're going to take a break for commercials and news. We'll be back with hour number 3 after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, and we're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Helen in Florida. Aloha, Helen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello.
Hello. Aloha, nui.
Yeah, we are under the New World Order.
Not yet, we're not, but it's getting close.
No, we are. It happened from the time of Lucifer, from the time he came from the heavens and down here. And we are being deceived, and we don't recognize it. And
you know, I think we're letting a lot of just naturally bad people off the hook by trying to blame it on Lucifer. But I remember this story when I was growing up where they were talking about, when God first created humans and Lucifer said, I'd like to be involved in this, and God said no, and, Lucifer said, who's going to make the humans' laws? And God said, what, you, Lucifer, be allowed to make man's laws? And Lucifer said, no, I just want the people to make up their own laws. And I think it's a good metaphor for just how we wound up where we are.
Where's that written?
I don't know where it's written. It's just something I heard many, many years ago when I was a child.
Oh, okay, let's go by what is written.
Well, let me make a point here. First of all, as you know, I am not a believer in Santa Claus or...
I'm not even a believer in Santa Claus. I'm not talking about the Christendom.
Okay.
I'm not talking about Christendom because that's also appropriated by Lucifer.
Okay, but you seem to believe that there's a Lucifer.
Of course.
Well, see, that there we're going to have to disagree. Okay? And my opinion is, Helen, listen, Helen. Good people are going to tend to do good things, and bad people will do bad things, and both will very often claim...
We're not talking about good and bad. We're talking about who's controlling the universe.
I think the universe is controlled by accident and stupidity.
You think so?
Yeah. It's the way it looks.
You don't believe in you don't believe in a creator?
No, I don't, as a matter of fact. So I guess we've kind of pretty much hit...
Then I'm talking to the wrong person because...
All right, well, thank you for calling. Okay, now then, getting on to Arash in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? I'm just pulling over right now. Give me 1 second. And I wanted to bring up vaccines. And, you know, about the adjuvants in there, the thimerosal and aluminum and...
Peanut oil and all this other stuff.
Absolutely.
And Nagalase. And I still cannot find any legitimate justification for Nagalase to be in vaccines.
There you go, and that's exactly what I was going to bring up. There is absolutely no reason for these compounds to be in these vaccines. And the only conclusion that I could come to is that it has to be a malicious reason. There is no positive reason for these adjuvants to be in these vaccines.
Okay, well let me tell you why the adjuvants are there. Because what the vaccine is trying to do is deliberately provoke an immune response. Okay, yes. So that your body's immune system, in theory, this is how it's supposed to work, your body will discover the attenuated pathogen in the vaccine and build antibodies to it. The downside is your body's immune system also develops a reaction to the adjuvants themselves. That's why we've seen all this peanut anaphylaxis you strike through our population because of the use of peanut oil as an adjuvant.
Right, but I'm thinking, could they not find any compound that's less lethal than mercury and aluminum? I'm sure they could, and I'm sure at the same time it was not supposed to be pumped directly into your bloodstream at the same time, right?
Well, certainly that's true of peanut oil. The reason they were using thimerosal was as a preservative, because vaccines have a very short shelf life, and just like the food on the supermarket shelf, the longer it lasts, the less they have to throw away, and that controls costs and increases profits. And that's why it was in there. And the idea that it might actually be harmful just really didn't occur to anybody.
Right. So it's all about cost saving. And another point I wanted to bring up is that babies' brains before the age of 2, their white matter, which is the communication route for the gray matter into the central brain, is unmyelinated. That means it doesn't have this fatty shield around it to aid in electron transmission. And what I've seen, or from my research, is that babies that are given all these vaccines prior to the age of 2 are highly susceptible to developing autism somewhere in the spectrum.
Okay, that's interesting.
Because of that ubiquity between the age of 0 and 2, I think that has something to do with it. I'll look into it and do more research, and I'll call back and let you know about it.
Yeah, I hadn't actually considered that, but we're hearing all these stories about at 1 year old your kid gets these 8 vaccines. And we get what happened to Robert De Niro's kid and Aidan Quinn's kid and the CEO of NBC's grandchild, and it just happened to a close family friend. Same thing. Perfectly healthy kid gets the mandatory vaccines, now diagnosed with autism. And I hadn't thought about that structural difference in the brains prior to 2 years old as being an issue there.
Yes, that's why the prevalence seems to decrease around the age of 20 to 24 months. So you look into it as well, Mikey.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect that definitely deserves to be looked at. Thank you very much for the information and the phone call. And Again, one of the big problems, and we were talking about this, I think, 2 weeks ago, even when the parents go on in and say, I only want the MMR vaccine, and even that one is very risky, you got to look at that package insert. And it does include sudden infant death syndrome, autism, even with that one. Even when the parents tell the doctor, only that one, and the doctors will say, well, we're here to make money. Put the other 8 in there, shake it up, it's only one needle, they won't know any difference. We're going to build the insurance company. And it's harming kids. And they just don't seem to care. Whatever happened to that principle from Hippocrates? First of all, do no harm. Well, if we harm them, we make more money off of them. That'll be a lifetime of them coming back and getting treatments and, all the rest of it. It's amazing. All right, let's talk a little bit about human-caused global warming. We are finally getting into spring across the northern hemisphere. It's still snowing over in Spiti in the Himalayas, which was a little bit of a surprise. But I was talking with our mail carrier earlier today because everyone around here is saying it's very cool for Hawaii for this time of the year. And it is. And people are noticing it. But we're already seeing in the headlines, oh, the hot streak is going on. It's a record 3 months. They're already back to trying to convince you the world is warm, it's your fault, and you have to pay a carbon tax. It's amazing. Meanwhile, as you know, they're having tremendous problems down in Houston. They're having a major storm. It's causing serious flooding down in Houston, Texas. Rain and snow. It's still heavy snowfall down there in Houston. It is weird. It is very, very weird. Now then, do you remember the Sukhoi 34 warplane? Russia was using them up in Syria to tremendous effect. Now they're being used on a new mission because apparently there is an ice-jammed river in Russia that is threatening massive flooding across the countryside, so they deployed the Sukhoi 34s to blow up this ice dam and release the water before it floods above there. So there's a positive use for a Sukhoi 34, and also another reminder that, yes, there is still snow and ice all over the northern hemisphere. We're going to take a commercial break. When we come on back, we've got a caller waiting on the line, and I want to talk to you about something called the 50-to-1 Project and a rather fundamental revelation. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So there's this group out here called the 50-to-1 Project, and they have a video. We put it up at WhatReallyHappened.com. And basically, starting with the official claims about carbon dioxide and climate change, they did some calculations, and they found out that it would cost 50 times as much to try and stop the climate from changing as it would be to simply adapt to climate change. And it reminds me very much, and first of all, I think the number is not accurate. Because even if we paid all of the carbon tax Obama wants, even if we bought all of Al Gore's carbon credits, it's not going to stop the climate from changing. Climate always changes. It always has. It always will. It was changing before humans appeared on this planet. It will go on changing after humans are gone. What dominates climate on Earth are two factors. The amount of solar radiation, which is in decline at the moment, and the slowly changing shape of Earth's orbit from circular to elliptical and back again. When it's more elliptical, Earth spends more time at the far end of the ellipse, following Kepler's laws of orbital motion, and we get the ice ages. When the Earth's orbit returns to circular, we get the interglacials, which is where we are right now. So until Al Gore can actually control how much energy the sun is putting out, or change the shape of Earth's orbit, there isn't anything they can do to stop climate change. Period. End of discussion. It's just another scam to get money. And I think that's illustrated by a story that came out of Al Gore's organization when he was first ramping up the Inconvenient Truth, which has now been thoroughly discredited. There was actually an employee in Al Gore's project who actually believed this was about fighting global warming. And he did a little study, and he said, you know, if we just increase green plants in the urban areas by 15%, that'll absorb all the excess carbon dioxide and the problem's going to be solved. Al Gore fired him on the spot because Al Gore doesn't want to control carbon dioxide. He wants to sell carbon credits. That's what it's about. And here we have another record winter we're just getting out of. It has lingered well into spring. And they're already out there saying, oh, it's a scorcher. It's the first 3 months of 2016. It's the hottest years on record. No, the 1930s were a lot hotter. Every time they come out with a graph saying the world is getting warmer, they always go back to just far enough to get the graph that they want. And they'll never talk about the Roman and medieval warming periods, which were much warmer than we have now. It's a scam. It's a big scam. From the same people who told you Saddam had nuclear weapons. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a couple of phone calls. Will, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I'm a landscaper, so I'm in the field, and we're weeks behind from how long winters drug out. So yeah, I think people are starting to figure that out. Hey, have you touched on or have you heard about the Saudi Arabia threatening to dump treasuries, or like 500 billion treasuries on the market if we unclassify the certain parts of the 9/11 Commission report?
No, that's not what Saudi Arabia said. Saudi Arabia is responding to a bill in Congress that would allow Saudi Arabia to be sued for 9/11, even though there's no actual evidence they did it. And it's being spun to make it look like Saudi Arabia has something to hide. But the reality is, every time the U.S. decides they're going to go after another Middle Eastern nation, the first thing they do is they say, we have evidence they were behind 9/11. They did it to Afghanistan, then they did it to Iraq, now they're doing it to Saudi Arabia. And the only means that Saudi Arabia has to defend itself is the fact that they have invested something like $750 billion in our U.S. financial system.
Aha. So did you hear Kasich today? He just openly came out and was like, quote unquote, there are no rules in a contested convention, and he like even repeated it and paraphrased it a couple times with this horrible arrogance about him. And I'm just thinking to myself, how about new rule? No part of the election process should have no rules.
Well, you know, this ties in with that story where Shepard Smith was saying that former Senator Alphonse D'Amato was confirming the GOP is going to change the convention rules so Kasich can be considered as a nominee. That Rule 40 that they put in to block Ron Paul, they're going to throw it out because Kasich hasn't won enough states to qualify as a potential candidate in the primary. So they're just going to change the rules again. And it really is very absurd. They are sending a message to the Republican voters that what we want doesn't matter. You will take the candidates we give you, und you will like it, you Schweinhund.
Sing high. I think if they go ahead and steal it from Bernie, they might just kick off enough people on both sides to where everybody pours into the GOP from both sides.
Well, you've got the same thing going on in both parties. I mean, Hillary is stealing from Bernie Sanders. Everybody's trying to get rid of Trump. And what's going to come out of all of this is the entire political electoral system of the U.S. federal government is going to be completely discredited and seen as illegitimate.
Yep. Well, get your physical while you can, people.
Absolutely.
Thanks for everything you do, brother.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Anthony in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Just on a side note, I was just listening to Mark Levine just before I talked to you, and he was talking about how Hillary's going to absolutely crush Donald Trump, that it's a waste of time, and it's a good thing I don't listen to Mark Levine that much, but, the propaganda is already going on about Donald Trump not really having any chance in the election, but we'll see what happens. The main reason for my call was this, and actually I agree with Ryan Dawson today. You said that, I agree with you. I think Saudi Arabia had a minor role in 9/11. Obviously, Israel and the neoconservatives in the U.S. were the primary movers for it. But I do think Saudi Arabia did have one beneficial agenda, and the fact that the regime change in Iran, Syria, and Iraq was beneficial for them. They did definitely wanted Saddam out. They weren't getting along with him. They agreed with the P9 documents. They wanted the regime change in the Shia-dominated country. So I think there was some benefit to to Saudi Arabia in that sense. So I think I disagree with that to a certain extent. I don't know if you would agree with that.
I would agree with it, and I don't rule out that Saudi Arabia intelligence agencies were helping Israel in the United States. But what they're trying to do in the establishment media is make it look like 9/11 was all Saudi Arabia's doing. And as I keep pointing out, first of all, there isn't a motive for Saudi Arabia to kill the goose that's laying all those golden eggs. Because Saudi Arabia's wealth has come from their relationship with the United States. And second, if Saudi Arabia wanted to hurt the United States of America, they don't need to crash planes into buildings to do it. All they got to do is ask for their money back that's invested in the U.S. financial system, and it'll all come crashing down. Okay?
I know. Okay, but...
Thanks a lot. All right, we're going to be back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the We Hate Donald Trump network is going on and on about the controversy. They're changing the faces on the paper money. Actually, they ought to take that little cartoon man character from the Monopoly game and just put his face on all the currency, because that's really about all it's worth. It would be much more appropriate, I think. Now then, over in Germany, they are asking Belgium to shut down 2 of its nuclear reactors out of safety concerns, and specifically the Tihang 2 and Doel 3 reactors, because there are serious safety questions regarding the integrity of the reactor pressure vessels. Now, that is a critical component in any nuclear power station. This is basically a big, thick metal can that holds the radioactive core where the fission takes place and holds water, or in some cases sodium, which transfers the heat from the reactor to the secondary cooling loop, which powers the steam generators that run the turbines and generates electricity. But that primary cooling loop and that containment vessel, those are critical. If they fail, it's all over. You take a bulldozer to the remains of the power station and you just bury it. Leaks in the secondary cooling loop or the heat exchangers and that can all be dealt with. If that primary pressure vessel fails or that primary cooling loop, it's all over. It's all over. Now, over at Hanford, remember only yesterday, the official word from the government is, this is nothing serious to worry about. Today we have a story from Zero Hedge. This is catastrophic. Thousands of gallons of highly radioactive waste leak at the nuclear site. And Hanford is one of the worst contaminated locations on planet Earth. It's up in Washington State, and they've been storing material up there. A lot of it goes back to the Manhattan Project to create the first atomic bomb, and they weren't being very careful with it. We have to get the bomb. We've got to get the bomb before the Nazis and the Japanese do, and then we've got to blow up Hiroshima and Nagasaki and scare the Russians and so forth. And it is a rather tragic reality throughout history that when governments get caught up in the war fever, their thinking is limited to that war, and they don't care about the harm what they do causes to future generations, whether it's all the depleted uranium that is all over Iraq, causing birth defects among the Iraqi people and our returning veterans. They don't care if they have these stockpiles of dangerous weapons just corroding away and leaking. It's not important. We won the war. That makes everything okay. More concerns with the Indian Point nuclear power plant on the Hudson River. According to an article coming out of Waking Times, there is a major increase in thyroid cancer in the area of what they're calling Chernobyl on the Hudson. Thyroid cancer rates have seen a huge spike in the last 15 years, as many as 20,000 cases of thyroid cancer. And finally, story coming out of Natural News, apparently, and this is being hushed up by the Japanese government, but there is a massive increase in serious birth abnormalities of children being born to the survivors of the Fukushima disaster. Huge number of stillbirths. Apparently, Japanese women who live in that area are getting sonograms. If there's anything that appears out of normal, they're opting for abortions. It's a horrible, horrible tragedy. Apparently, some of these children are developing more than the usual number of limbs, and so they're being aborted. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Joe in New York, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. As usual, great job. Thanks for all your help and information.
Thank you.
I was just kicking this around. What about a Bernie-Trump combination? Tell me that wouldn't stick it to Hillary and probably Kasich.
Well, there's a couple of problems. First of all, Donald Trump would want to be in the first billing.
Right.
He's not real hot on the number 2 seat. Second, I need to go and find out when the deadline is for petitions to get a third party put on the state ballots, because the Republicans and the Democrats have an advantage. Whoever their candidate is goes on the ballot in all 50 states. Okay, but if you are mounting a third-party challenge, you have to have petition drives in every state just to get on the ballot. Now, the Libertarians have already done that. They're on the ballots in almost all the states. But I need to find out when that deadline is, because if they wait until after the conventions and Cruz or Kasich is the GOP nominee and Hillary is the Democratic nominee, it may actually be too late to mount a successful third-party campaign if they can't get those petitions to get on the ballots in the 50 states.
If they could agree, that sounds like an unbeatable team. I don't care if you put a third-party Libertarian in to swing it Hillary's way or not. I think Trump and Bernie would be...
Well, I would certainly support them to the best of my ability. I mean, my attitude right now is anybody but Hillary, and Cruz is simply ineligible, and as a strict constitutionalist, no, I do not want to see him get in there. And Kasich is just being thrown out there to make it look like Hillary's got somebody to steamroller over. That caller who called in saying that their other talk radio host is saying, oh, Hillary can beat Donald Trump. Do you realize how ridiculous that is? Where they're out there, where they're out there saying that you know Cruz can beat Hillary and Kasich can beat Hillary, but Hillary can beat Trump, when Trump is cleaning the clocks of all the other GOP candidates.
Yes, I think Hillary could beat Trump if you put the third-party Libertarian in there.
I think Hillary can beat Trump only by massive election fraud or a bullet. And I wouldn't put it past her. Remember, Hillary Clinton knows all the dirty tricks Richard Nixon did for his reelection campaign. She worked on the Watergate Committee, and she is replaying that strategy. She doesn't want to run against Donald Trump. She wants to run against Cruz or Kasich. She knows she can just steamroller over those two guys.
I just wish there was more we could do to bring this to the light, because there's a lot of people still sleeping, and they were out there voting.
Get on out there and talk to them. Just talk to everybody that you know, everybody listening to this broadcast. You need to have the courage to go on out and say, look, this election process is crooked. They're hijacking delegates. Hillary literally bribed the state Democratic parties to give her the superdelegates. It's completely out of control. I would like to see Americans get really, really angry, and I'd like to see there to be such an overwhelming vote in November against the current insiders. Just sweep them out. Washington, D.C. needs an enema, and we need to get rid of all these corrupt career politicians. We need to get rid of all the pro-war, pro-Israel, friend of Israel. We need to give them all pink slips.
That's you preaching to the choir, Mike. Thank you for your knowledge, and I'm going to try to share it with everybody.
Well, please do. Thanks an awful lot. And you will find that when you have the courage to speak out, you will give others around you the courage to speak out. Because most of those people are still walking around thinking they're the only ones who feel something has gone wrong with this country.
It's changing little by little. I see more and more people are just giving little sparks of knowledge.
Yes.
They're waking up. Yes.
They are waking up. They know what's going on. They're staying silent out of a misguided sense of patriotism and politeness, but that, too, is beginning to decline. Thanks for the call, Joe. We're going to let you go. Now, there was this bizarre story that came out over in Press TV, how Georgia, Russian Georgia, not U.S. Georgia, had arrested 6 people for illegally selling uranium-238, and everybody's out there, oh, my goodness. And the article said they had $200 million worth of radioactive uranium-238. I don't know what's going on, but the story has some serious problems. First of all, you need to understand uranium-238 is the most common isotope of uranium. It is not fissile. You cannot make a bomb out of it. It is used to make reactor fuel rods. But the current spot price for uranium-238 is only $20 per pound. So they would need 10 million pounds of it to reach a value of $200 million. They claim it was all in somebody's apartment. The entire story is suspect, and I'm wondering why. What are we being set up for with this one? We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, the last segment of our program today on this Wednesday. Getting a breaking story here. Apparently a judge in the Judicial Watch lawsuit regarding the email has just ordered Hillary Clinton's top aides, Huma and Cheryl, to give depositions. Now, this is outside the congressional and FBI investigations, which we are already seeing signs of are going to be blocked and interfered with. We already have Attorney General Loretta Lynch is out there saying, well, even if the FBI thinks there was a crime, it's up to me, and I just don't think espionage while Secretary of State is worth bothering to prosecute, but we're going to get those global warming deniers. This is a civil lawsuit. And there is no way that the Obama administration can come on in to this lawsuit and interfere with it without opening itself up to an obstruction of justice charge, which is an impeachable offense. So this is, my nickel is on judicial watch. I don't have any confidence the FBI and the Department of Justice are going to do anything about what is clearly espionage. And remember, espionage is not what you see in the James Bond movies. Espionage is legally defined as allowing secret material to pass from its normal protected storage to any unprotected open area. And it need not be malicious, and you need not prove intent to harm. You can be guilty of espionage by negligence, and that certainly is at the very least, what Hillary was doing. Now then, speaking of computers and security and encryption, as you know, the U.S. government is trying to come up with a law that's going to ban all encryption. Because, gosh darn it, they want to be able to look in and spy at your business secrets and pictures of your naked daughters and sisters and wives whenever they want, because that's the divine right of being a tyrant. Now, as you know, WhatsApp, which is the messaging service Facebook owns, has default end-to-end encryption for its billion users. Now, yesterday, Viber said it's going to do the same thing for the 700 million people who use it. This is significant, because Viber is not a U.S. company. It's outside the United States and not subject to any laws passed by Congress. And it shows the futility of legislating encryption, especially when you have people writing those laws who don't know anything about computers and encryption and communication. The current draft of the encryption ban is so broadly written it actually bans file compression. Now if you are somebody who enjoys an occasional puff of the pakalolo, which is the Hawaiian word for crazy smoke, there's an app called Hi There that allows you to find smoking buddies. Do not use it. Apparently, the security firm Synac took a look at it and found out it's actually very easy for the cops to break into and find out where you're lighting up if you happen to live in an area where such things are still forbidden. We're getting word that there's been a massive explosion at a Mexico oil factory, the Pemex facility in the port city of Coatzacoalcos. A huge explosion in apparently a plant that works on producing or processing chlorine. And hundreds are being evacuated, but it's a big, big accident here. As you probably have already heard, they had another aftershock down in Ecuador, magnitude 6.1, no tsunami warnings, although the offshore data buoys were showing ocean displacement, but it wasn't all that great. So that's still rocking and rolling over there. Over in Japan, the aftershocks are continuing there as well. And there's an article in Rense.com about how Japanese authorities seem to be ignoring that this could be the beginning of a cascading quake series along a known major fault line. And instead we're getting, it's probably, Mount Aso's eruptions got nothing to do with it. They're not linked. And it sort of reminds us of all the things they were saying about Fukushima when it first happened. Oh, it's no big deal. We got Ann Coulter to say radiation's good for you. But the total number of earthquakes in Japan topped 600 in just 5 days. Now, that is including the little tiny magnitude 1 quakes that you don't even feel. But that's a lot of quakes. And I don't think that we're out of that situation just yet. Down in Mexico, their Popocatépetl volcano is continuing to erupt. And if it were to really cut loose, it could reach almost all the way to Mexico City. Down in Santiago, Chile, boy, as if those people have not had enough problems. They too are also going through a serious flooding crisis. Heavy rains have been pouring down since Friday, and the flooding has struck the capital, and it's contaminated their city water system. And Chile's water is now almost as bad as that you get up there in Flint, Michigan. As you know, there's an oil glut, and there have been talks about the oil-producing nations restricting production to drive oil prices back up. And they were going to have a big meeting, and originally they said, we will not do it without Iran coming in on board, and Iran was saying, no, we've got to, the sanctions are lifted. We're going to sell our oil. We have to rebuild our treasury. So apparently there was no deal from this meeting in Qatar, and everybody's going to go on pumping and selling as fast as they can. At the moment, the glut is so bad, there are 200 million barrels of oil sitting in tankers at Chinese ports, just waiting a turn to unload. They're calling it the world's biggest traffic jam. We actually have a bunch of tankers permanently at anchor off the south coast here, which if you're going to sit idle and not doing anything, Oahu is a good place to do it. Now, over at Deutsche Bank, it looks like their problems are just beginning following their admission, as part of a settlement with the U.S. government, that yes, indeed, they were rigging silver and gold prices. And if they thought that settlement and the wrist slap was the end of it, they are wrong. Canada is filing lawsuit, and apparently there are mobs of angry investors are mounting a class action lawsuit against Deutsche and all the other banks involved with the rigging. And frankly, anybody who invested in physical silver and gold over the last 10 years is going to be a member of that class. They've created a huge, huge mess. Housing starts have plunged 8.8%. Permits plunged 7%. Bloomberg is out there saying there's still a fundamental strength in the real estate market. I don't think so. It's all staggering to a halt. Now, we were reporting on how police in Cincinnati were spending $20 million to get riot gear ahead of the GOP convention, and I have a feeling they're going to need it. But it's actually all across the United States. U.S. law enforcement are spending vast sums of taxpayer money on riot control gear. They're getting ready for massive civil unrest all across the country. Remember that old saying, the difference between civilization and anarchy is just 9 meals? We could see that if the supply chain breaks down. Now, here's a little story. Up in Chicago, there was a man who spent 10 years in jail on drug charges, was finally set free. An investigation proved that police officers and a state's attorney investigator lied under oath to secure a conviction. This is why, all jokes about crucifying hackers aside, I cannot support a death penalty. There are police and prosecutors who want to score convictions. It's like a game, a notch on the gun. I put away all these criminals. Were they all guilty? Who cares? And finally, one more article here, Patriot Rising, talking about this new law where the government wants to absolutely criminalize all forms of encryption. Well, you can have my Captain Midnight secret decoder badge when you pry it from my cold dead fingers. Because under this law, it is written so broadly, this is actually a criminal device now. This little tiny badge here from 1934, 1935, was a little promo for the Captain Midnight radio show. And it's very silly. And again, as we proved with our NSA challenges, real criminals and terrorists are still going to have secure communications. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical. Talk to all your friends and family about what's going on with these crooked elections. The more you speak out, the more you will give others the courage to speak out. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Aloha, America.